Let's talk England rugby. How did Eddie Jones and his team punch back and level the series? So we saw a much improved performance from the England rugby team in the second test of the summer tour this week. And I think really it came down to game plan. And I think as I talked about in the video last week, I think the game plan was simple. And to be honest, I think what we did is we played a low-risk game, whereby last week it was more of a high risk. We played a low-risk game. And you have to think that every successful team, rugby, football, probably is based on their successful club teams. And, look at the final this year. We played Leicester and Saracens. In many ways, they play a very similar style. And the theme of that style is a low-risk game. Yes, there's probably a dominance on kicking, but it's kicking effectively. And I think sometimes England's criticism in the past has not been that we're kicking there is a kicking too much, but kicking too much and poorly. So it doesn't really change the game. I think kicking quite in an attacking way, so kick chase or kicking for ground to turn the team can actually be quite exciting as well, given the chase and the kind of work around that. But I think it comes down to a clarity and a clear approach of playing. If you're bringing in players regularly and you've got players who are fairly new at international level, it helps to have a kind of clear way you're playing when you're under that pressure and the heat. I think you've got to, we had to look at some of the coaches and the amount of sweat that was coming off their heads. It needed to be that sort of situation whereby we need to have a clear message of playing. So I think the game plan was, I think going forward to the next week, I think there's probably two areas that I would like England to look at. I think the first one is the penalty advantage. So a number of times in that game, we got a situation where England got a penalty. We put a lot of pressure on the breakdown. Clearly, England wanted those penalties and kicks at goal. And I think as a result of that, they tended to sort of not really have a plan of what they might do with that penalty advantage. It often got out to Marcus Smith, who would then try something. And I think that reflected on his own game. But I think perhaps maybe a bit more clarity or a clear way of how we want to use those, or say to him, right, let's get the ball to Marcus. You do something, that's fine. But I felt like a number of times the players didn't really quite know what to do with that. And actually, I think the most successful teams use a penalty advantage. And actually, because you could actually change a 3 points into a 7. And I think England perhaps could build a score better by using that advantage, because there was quite a lot of times where we wasted it, and whether that's a kick to the corner, kick over top, or whether we try and play wide and quickly. France tend to do that quite well. I think we just need to have a kind of clear idea of how we want to use that. And that perhaps is where we complement. You get a more Farrell-based game for the base on the foundation of the game, and maybe Smith comes alive when we have those advantage plays, or perhaps later on where the play is not developing and we need to sort of break it up. So that perhaps where we can kind of complement each other. And I think the other thing, and probably linked to a little bit what I've just said, is around the building to the score. I don't believe that the players will feel much different to a fan. And I think most people who watch that game reflect that we got to about an hour in and there was nerves that started to come across, because England have been in these positions for a number of seasons, not just under Eddie Jones either. You think even back to the World Cup with Lancaster, England will tend to dominate early in the game and then they lose that control. It's very, very seldom do England get blown away early doors, but they have struggled probably ever since sort of Woodward's era to really kind of work on building that score. And to be honest, I think some of that is mentally. I think there is that doubt. As I say, as a fan, you're sort of feeling it. As a player, they probably feel it. And actually, that's even more pressure because the players who can influence that. And I actually think that's perhaps why, although it's important to think of the bigger picture towards the World Cup, I think results are important, because I think that winning mentality builds that confidence that they can see games out. Something that I saw in the Two Sides Lions documentary that I thought was interesting, that Alan Wynne-Jones kept on saying, don't stop, allow yourself to be bored. And I think what his point was that even though that simplistic game plan can be boring at times. I think actually it's just being able to prepare yourself to go that and not try anything outside of that game plan. And perhaps that builds that skill. So it's working on the efficiencies of your sort of skill sets and not do anything too dramatic. So looking ahead to the changes that I would make for the third test, I think some are quite forced, unfortunately. So there's confirmation come out that both Maro Itoje and Sam Underhill will not be available due to knocks in the second test. I would replace Itoje naturally with Chesham. He's obviously had game time during this series. I think it'd be good for him to start from the game. I think it'd be good for development as well. I think in terms of Underhill, again, Ludlam's had quite a lot of game time during this series and actually played really well. I think it was unfortunate not to start this week, so I would play him. In terms of replacing them on the bench, I would look at bringing Ezekwe in for Chesham, sort of like for like, one of those sort of hybrid lock type back rows. And reports are saying that Jack Willis is back in training, so hopefully he can fill in there. If not, we'll probably look into replace him with the guy from Bristol. So I think that's probably the most natural change. I wouldn't change too much. The only change I would potentially do if it was me in charge, I would look to bring Joe Marchant back into the squad on the bench. Well, I'd actually like to see him playing possibly at 13. I don't see it happening. Don't see them destabilising the winning team. But if we're going to stick with Porter at 13, I'd prefer to have Joe Marchant on the bench instead of Will Joseph. I think Marchant just brings a little bit more experience and seniority. And if we do need to draw on him, he's perhaps there's probably a little bit more confidence in terms of in his experience across the back line, rather than relying on a not only inexperienced at international level, but probably even inexperienced in men's rugby in Will Joseph, who is likely to become a good player. But I think Joe Marchant was a bit unfortunate to suffer the way he did and not even be brought onto the bench. So I'd bring Joe Marchant instead of Will Joseph, but generally I'll stick to the same team. And as I mentioned earlier, stick to the same way of playing. Really posed to be quite exciting. I think Australia will come out with something different. Both teams have got a number of injuries, and we'll see how that impacts the team going forward. And I just hope that England don't try and do anything too clever. I think they've found something that probably works and complements this group of set of players, and we can kind of sort of work on the edges rather. So that's my take on the second test. It'd be good to get your comments and thoughts. We're hoping to, at the end of the series, is to do kind of a collection of where we're at. Hopefully it's a winning video, but it's, I'm dead excited. It's only Monday and I'm really excited going forwards.